Welcome everybody to the live stream. Thanks so much for joining us here. We're going to be joining a conversation. We're going to be having a conversation rather with Jenny Wood. We're going to be talking about her new book, Wild Courage, Go After What You Want and Get It. If you are watching us on the YouTube channel, thanks so much. That's where I'll be kind of monitoring any kind of questions that come in. If you have some questions that you want to ask Jenny, please feel free to throw them in the chat as we make our way through. And if you're on LinkedIn, I'll follow up with comments afterwards, and anything that you might want to address afterwards, we can do it that way. We can kind of keep this, as I was saying to Jenny before we started the live stream, kind of keep it like organic, fast and loose kind of thing, as if we're sitting having, a drink, right? Since it's still 11 o'clock in the morning, I'm having a cup of coffee. I don't know what Jenny's got, but we'll find out in just a second, because here she is. Jenny Wood is joining us here. Thanks so much, Jenny, for being here today.
Oh, it's so fun to be here. Club Soda.
There you
really
go.
Pushing it today at 12:05 p.m. in Boulder.
Yes, because so you're only, you're past that noontime. So technically you could have something with, and actually one of my good friends, Matt Giovanisi, lives just outside of Boulder, and he has his own brewery in his garage.
Ooh, cool.
Where he'll do things like he has hop water and all that stuff. So it's when I was there for Podcast Movement a couple of years ago, we hung out there, and it was like I finally got to be in that building. So it was kind of cool. But
is it Podcast Moon like a honeymoon?
Podcast movement, not moon.
Oh, okay. I was like, that sounds really cool. Everyone should go on a podcast.
They should. Yeah, Podcast Moon. It's a little late for that, considering as we're recording this, we've just dropped episode 601 of my podcast, of this podcast. Right. So what we're doing now today is we're recording an episode that is going to be released in a little while, but we want to give everybody a bit of a sneak peek, an advanced look at it. And so that's why we decided to do this live stream where we get to talk about this book that, as I showed you before, and I illustrated, there are plenty of dog-eared elements to this book. But for those that they may not be familiar with you out of the gate, can you just share a little bit, first off, who you are and what prompted you to write a book that essentially combines the what people would normally consider to be courage as very stoic with this wild element to it?
Yeah. Sure. So I'm Jenny. I was at Google for 18 years, grew from entry level to executive. I've got 2 kids, 7 and 9, and one husband who's 40. And we live in Boulder. He's 5 years younger than I am. I'm 45. Twist. Okay, here's the twist, actually, and this ties into why I wrote this book. It's 2011. I'm riding the subway home from work, and I see this really good-looking guy standing about 20 feet away from me. But most people, I'm scared of fear of failure, of fear of uncertainty, fear of judgment of others. So rather than being bold and talking to him on this train, I sit there and I do nothing, but I make a deal with the universe, and I say, if he gets off at my stop, then I'll try to strike up a conversation with him, and if not, then say la vie. He gets off at the next stop, not my stop, and then this wave of wild courage washes over me and practically pushes me out of my subway seat, and I run off the train. I chase after him. Long story short, I give him my business card. We go on a date the next week. We get So that is, and was it bold? Was it shameless? Was it, reckless, right? All these negative sounding words, like they served me so well that day. And so wild courage is reclaiming these 9 words that create the bars of an invisible cage that keep you small.
What I found fascinating as I went through the book was, first off, some of the things that you kind of discussed, these traits that we talk about. These traits kind of initially appear as if they are not negative, but they do, they can't, they can, like recklessness, for example, and bossiness, like there can be that connotation attached to them. How, when you were putting the book together and when someone goes through the book and goes, oh, like I'm bossy, is that something nosy, like those kind of, how did you navigate that, not just in the writing of the book, but also when you're dealing with, those that have read the book to say, hey, no, but I went this direction for the very reason that it's kind of a counterintuitive process, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. So first of all, it was uncomfortable for me to write it initially and to like adopt these 9 traits because when we were first developing the concept, and we developed it because my editor gave me this homework assignment on the a flight back from New York to Boulder. He said, I want you to write down everything that has helped you be successful, right? You're a pilot, you're like a recreational pilot, you're a Google executive, you chase this guy off the subway, made this beautiful family. I want you to think of all the things that have helped you be successful that could have a bit of an ick factor.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so as I wrote down this homework assignment, I just like kind of free wrote 14 pages. It ended up being, and it was things like, okay, when my agent took me on, I was a real small fish in her big pond. She's got a lot of really big names, my literary agent, and like,
Yep.
who the heck is Jenny Wood, right? And so I wrote in this document, I said, well, I wrote her a handwritten thank you note that said all the reasons why I was excited to work with her, kind of saying, well, if I'm not some big name, I want to get a little extra attention from her, and that little element of humanity might help. And so that became kind of a concept of manipulative. I was trying to influence or manipulate a situation, not with
Yeah.
the intention to harm anybody, but I define manipulative as the courage to build influence through empathy and craft lasting relationships. Because whether you're selling a product, an idea, or yourself, your ability to, win friends and allies is all about mutual benefit. So go figure out what somebody wants and get it for them. And sometimes people just want to feel valued. Actually, oftentimes I would say people just want to feel valued.
Yeah.
And so if I could make my agent feel valued by writing a handwritten note, which few people do, and enumerating all the ways I was excited to work with her, sure, call it manipulating a situation, but we now have a great relationship.
And by the way, it was interesting when I went through the acknowledgments and saw the homework assignment. I know David.
Oh, yes.
David Moldauer
yes.
actually helped me get with Creative Live initially. Going through the acknowledgments, I'm like, it's a veritable who's who of folks. Speaking of...
the acknowledgments is like a novella in and of itself. And I was like, you can pry these acknowledgments from my cold, dead hands. They're all staying in there.
So one of the things I wanted to get to was when you kind of talked about the weird trait. We're going to go through these, and we're not necessarily going to go through them in order because, like I said, there's a lot of notes here, and I want to bounce all over. One of the things you talked about was regret being heavier than failure early on in the book, and then when you started to talk about Brian, who you eventually left, you said this quote, which I found rather interesting: "One of the best decisions I've made, however late." So the correlation there was really interesting to me when I read that. Is that, do you find that even though when you exhibit these traits of wild courage, how often are you trying to make sure that regret factor and failure factor are kept in their place, for lack of a better term?
Yeah. So you're asking, like, am I more likely to take an action because I recognize that people regret the actions they don't take more than the actions they do take that don't pan out?
Yeah, I think so. But also even in that statement of however late, you recognize, there is an aura of regret that showed up for me in that sentence, because I felt that too, like, if only I had done, like, my latest book, oh my gosh, this book should have been out a number of years ago, et cetera, et cetera. It's that paradoxical element of regret and failure that I think, and you address failure as I think the recklessness aspect of things is an area, and even the obsessive aspect of things
Yes.
leads into that too.
Yeah, for sure. So, this makes me think of something else I say in the book, which is not my line, and it's not clear who it's attributed to, but the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today, right?
Yep.
So that to me is a little bit of the, like, no matter how late I left. So just to give context here, Brian is somebody I dated, kind of friends, kind of something in between, real complicated. And I talk about this with the weird trait. Weird is the courage to stand out. And it's, like, within your so-called weirdness lie your greatest strength. So hone and highlight every ounce of weird you've got. And what Brian wanted, this guy I was dating, was someone who was blonde and petite and a wallflower, and someone who, his words, was really pretty but didn't think that she was. And it wasn't going to be me. I'm brunette, and I dance down the sidewalk to a cappella show tunes on my headphones, like tap dancing, and just kind of let my freak flag fly, and always do. And it just wasn't his flavor of weird. And so whether it's a relationship or a friendship or a boss or a project or a company, if you're not meshing, it's stop trying to fit your square peg into a round hole. And again, no matter how late I decided, finally I got out, but the amount of, like, heartache and heartbreak and drama and unhealthy dynamics that I suffered for those 6 years of weirdness of friendship, relationship, whatever it was pretty painful. And so I'm very proud of myself for pulling out of that situation. But yeah, it was pretty painful while I was in it. And I think people can relate to staying in a situation longer than they should because it's uncomfortable to make the tough call. My friend Kim called off a wedding 3 days before the wedding, and that was uncomfortable. That, I'm sure she felt bad doing it, but better to make that call 3 days before the wedding than suffer 3 months, 3 years, 30 years in an unhappy marriage when you potentially have kids in the mix and are dealing with a divorce. So, kudos to her for the wild courage it took to do something unconventional, untraditional, and unexpected.
As we make our way through, the selfish part got to me too, because I actually literally had a conversation about this yesterday, I think with someone in a group coaching program that I'm working through, where I talked about serving and self-serving. And if you're doing self stuff right, then you can do serving stuff right. But if you're not doing the other, they actually work well hand in hand. And one of the things you bring up in the chapter about selfishness is, if you want something done, give it to someone busy. That quote comes up, which again, I don't know where it's another familiar expression, kind of building on the one you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
But the thing like thinking, planning, visualizing, all those things that come up, it's the quality of that stuff versus the quantity. We get so obsessed with the optics and the looks of things. For someone who is struggling with this kind of identity around, if I do a lot of things, therefore I have value, therefore I'm being productive, versus, being selfish to a degree. I'd love for you to kind of dive into that, because especially, with your time at Google, a lot of people, oh my God, the fast-paced environment, et cetera, they must be checking off boxes left, right, and center.
Not everyone.
So can we lean into that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So, for this, I have a simple guidance here, which is say yes to the big and say no to the small. And the big is like, what's important to your boss? What's important to the department? What's important to the organization? Maybe it's the 2025 marketing project, which is like the flagship goal you have on your team. Maybe it's increasing customer satisfaction by 12% quarter over quarter, whatever it is. There are some big things. If you don't know what they are, go ask your boss, read your VP's weekly newsletter. Don't archive that one, even if it's, like 9 paragraphs, read that one. Go talk, every 6 months, go set up a meeting with your boss's boss and get to know them and understand their priorities, what's keeping them up at night, share your strengths, your assets. And that's the big. That's how you identify what's the big. Well, now what's small? I said, say yes to the big, say no to the small. Small is being the 18th person to reply all on the happy birthday, Jimmy email, right? Or going to every single meeting where you neither add value nor derive value, but it's on your calendar. So you think the polite thing to do is to show up, or how could I God forbid I click that button that says no on the calendar invite, right? But then you're letting somebody else, drive your day, drive your agenda, lead your time versus you leading it. So that's small. Or for example, always saying yes to take notes in the meeting, or always raising your hand to lead the company, annual lunch or offsite, or the whatever it is that by the way, I should say these things are great for team building, great for culture. You want to do some of it, but if you do too much of that small stuff, it's what I call nap work, not actually promotable. Because when people under me at Google would want a promotion, I was never giving them a promotion because they responded to every email. I was never giving them a promotion because they showed up to meetings and nodded like a bobblehead, right?
Yeah.
No, I was giving them a promotion if they did something significant, if they did something material, if they did something that moved the business, because what moves the business is what moves your career. So I say yes to the big, say no to the small, and don't nap at work, right? Not actually promotable work, and call it selfish. But, sit there in silence, sit there in the discomfort when the boss asks, who can lead this community culture building pillar, right? Not that you should never do that stuff, but maybe dial it to 10% away from that. If you let the community culture pillar last year, let somebody else have the awesome opportunity to do it this year. And that is selfish in the best way.
I want to dive into the obsessive part, because there's something that comes up fairly early on. There's a quote here that we can attribute to Matthew Crawford about craftsmanship means dwelling on a task for a long time and going deeply into it because you want to get it right. And that's something I love, especially in a world right now that is so obsessed with efficiency and getting efficiency wrong. You actually said in this, prioritize quality over efficiency. How does being obsessive help one do that? And how do you, because there's some traps with the traits too, right? How do you make sure that there's that balance, right? Because that is where people, I think, get stuck, is that they feel like, okay, everyone's focused on being efficient, but you can be efficient about the wrong things, right? Like, so can we explore that a little bit in terms of the obsessive trait?
Absolutely. So let's talk about what it means, and then let's talk about what it doesn't mean. So obsessed is the courage to set your own standard, to push, perform, persist, because, honestly, none of these traits, with the other 9 traits, will serve you well if you don't learn whether you've got the goods, right? And it's not for some company, it's to achieve your own ambitions. And it's a funny one. This is a funny one because I think this is one that could exhaust people or make people think, everyone wants to lean out, right? Like we all want to just go like nature bathe and lots of like woo woo, right? So my story here is that just the other day, I was talking to my keynote coach. I do a lot of keynote speaking for organizations and consulting and workshops. And so I'm honing my keynote speech, which has been a ton of fun. I've got this expert and this guy, Mike Pacquiao, and if anyone needs a keynote speech, by the way.
Who's been on the show and is a friend of mine.
I love that. Yeah, Mike's amazing.
Yeah, Mike's awesome.
Small world. Yes. Mike's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so he reads the book as the source material for my, my new adjusted keynote. And he's like, Jenny, loved the book, but I got to say, I skipped the obsessed chapter. It just sounded tiring. It sounded like you just wanted me to work harder. And I skipped over it. And I was like, okay, fine. I get it. Good feedback, first of all, right? That was his interpretation. Then fast forward a couple days and he texts me and he's like, Jenny, I want you to watch minute 7 of Steve Jobs' Stanford commencement speech. I love what he does here. And I think that you could do something similar. Okay. A couple hours later, Jenny, I just had this great idea for how at minute 13 of your keynote, you could tweak this joke to land a little bit differently. And here are 3 different options of what you could say. And then, fast forward the next couple of days, like constantly like, Jenny, I want you to watch this entire speech by Ramit Sethi on Google Talks and notice how he integrates with the audience, right? Or like interacts with the audience. And so I voice memoed to him and I was like, Mike, I got to call you on this, but what you are doing is obsessed. You are so dedicated. Your excellence is so clear. It's so palpable. You're so passionate about making this the best possible product that you can. Your enthusiasm fuels your effort. And that's what I mean by obsessed. So it is really fun to hear people react to that particular trait, but then to also explain what I mean, which is you have a high bar of excellence and that's okay. That's a good thing. Again, we go back to selfish, say yes to the right things and no to the wrong things. But that is what I mean by obsessed. Now let's look at the trait trap. So trait traps are when you take something too far and when a strength threatens to become a weakness. So for example, obsessed is adopting a healthy work ethic, letting your enthusiasm fuel the energy, the project, right? As I just mentioned, but it's not turning yourself into a workaholic pulp. And I did that once. I've done that more than once because I tend to get pretty excited about what I'm working on. But one time in particular, I was giving a speech in front of a lot of people. I had a different coach, actually, like a media trainer, and she had given me all these things to think about: hand positions and ums and uhs and filler words and intonation and body language and when I was going to walk across the stage. And I was so obsessed with getting every single piece of it right that I walked off the stage and I said to my husband, I bombed. And he's like, the audience reaction seemed great. I was like, no, I totally failed. And I'd failed myself to level set the right amount of prep and I'd like prepped for 30 hours, neglected everything else in my life for that week. And it was just too much. And so that was taking obsessed too far. There's this research by psychologist Barry Schwartz that's about maximizers and satisficers. Maximizers want to squeeze the last inch of every result possible. And maybe they get slightly better results, but they're less happy. Satisficers know when to push it and when to say 80% is good enough. And maybe they get slightly worse results, but they are much more satisfied with the product in the end, or the process, or their life, quite frankly. So I fall into this trait trap quite often. And one thing I'm working on is better knowing like when is 80%, when is 90% good enough, and when is it really worth the full enchilada. So yeah.
Tim brought up something really interesting. Obsessed sounds like a dream state for a hyper-focusing ADHDer.
So, yes, it's so interesting you say that, Tim. My son Ari, 9 years old, almost 10, severe ADHD. Like, huge part of his life, huge part of our life. And he is it's like if it's a preferred task, right? There's preferred tasks and non-preferred tasks. For him, non-preferred task is reading this book he needed to read through chapter 12 last night about this Mexican immigrant to the United States and all of her challenges with her cousin and whatever it was. He was not interested in this book. But a preferred task, nailing his yo-yo tricks, like just really excited about mastering yo-yo and jump rope. And it's not like he's not lazy because he doesn't want to read. He just gets hyper focused on the things that he is excited about and interested in. And I think long term this will serve him exceptionally well. But as a kid who's being told to do certain things at school, it's really tough to figure out where do you put that hyper focus? Where do you put that? How can you have that healthy obsession in some things that like maybe aren't your favorite thing to do? And then you have to translate that to your boss down the line where like sometimes your boss is going to want you to read this book about, Lupa and Mariola, and you're going to have to read it.
Well, and as we kind of make our way through, we talked about Mike a little bit here, and I'm going to get a little nosy, which is your one of the other traits.
Please do. Because you're Mike a podcast host asking questions. I would hope that you get nosy.
Well, Mike was like, okay, ask Jenny about what she's doing with her behind the scenes book marketing. Because my book just came out and he's like, you've got to look at what Jenny's doing around like all the stuff, which I've been following your stuff on Instagram, and we've actually had a couple of, back and forth on those platforms. Yeah. So that's what so there's a curiosity there that I'm curious about. So, now I'm going to tie this in. So I want you to answer that question, but I'm also going to tie it into the Vanessa story about manipulation, right? Because I didn't need to tell you that. I could have said, hey, what about the marketing? And you could have said, oh, well, that's fantastic. And I'm interested. But by me telling you that Mike asked me to ask it, I think that that is a form of, well, Mike invited me to ask the question. So therefore, there is that it's the combined efforts of both of those traits.
Authority. Yeah. That's so interesting. That is. Yeah. I mean, what's so cool about what you just brought up is like, there's all this micro stuff going on around relationship building or influence that I think we do, but we sometimes don't want to say out loud. Right. And an author I really respect read the book and he's like, Jenny, at first did not like it at all. He's like, it was super off-putting. I did not like these 9 traits. It felt like it was really forced, like you were trying to be outlandish for the sake of being outlandish. He's like, but then I got into it and I was like, oh no, you're just saying the quiet stuff out loud. and that's like, a lot of it is that, right? Like where, you're exposing to me, why you'd want to leverage another name to kind of like give more umph to your question. I would answer your questions either way, but think about how often we do that. It's like, oh, how can I invoke somebody else's authority or whatever, or like drop a name? I don't know. Now I'm taking it like way too esoteric, but my point is that there are all these things we do unconsciously that I'm bringing some consciousness to and saying these are not bad things. It is okay to build relationships in this way. So getting to the Vanessa story.
Sure.
This is the opening story of the manipulative chapter. And it tells how I wanted badly to meet Vanessa Van Edwards, super well-respected author and speaker. And I just thought the world of her. I was flying to Austin. Someone had just introduced us over email. And I said, Vanessa, I'm going to be in Austin for a couple of days, Thursday through Sunday. I'd love to connect with you and take you out to coffee. She says, oh, as it turns out, those are the exact days I'm going to be gone. I'm flying out Thursday, getting back Sunday. And I say, well, what time does your flight get in? Maybe I can meet you at the gate for coffee. And she said, gets in at 3. Well, my flight was supposed to land at like 5 p.m. or whatever it was. So I was going to miss her. But I wrote back and instead I said, oh my gosh, what are the chances? I actually get in at 1 p.m. that day because with a $60 change fee, I quickly changed my flight on Delta. So, was it a white lie? It was. Did it harm anybody? No. And efforts are, high investment and high reward. And so I didn't need to show her how the sausage was being made. I didn't need to tell her that I was a bit of a fangirl. But what I did want to do was go the extra mile, put the extra effort in to create a situation where I was at the airport the same time as her. But think about how many people would have been like, womp womp, doesn't work out. Guess, and like, she's not in the same city. It's not like I could easily dial her up the next day. And I think that that's a really smart thing to do to be successful in your life, in your relationships, in your career.
Well, and the interesting thing about it is, we hear the term like exploit, right? And people go, oh, exploit's negative. But it's not always. And so you brought up the quiet part out loud stuff, which I think is absolutely fascinating because when you're talking about the story you just shared about Vanessa and other stories that you share throughout this book, there's almost like a permission or a validation.
Yes. I am giving people permission to chase after what they want, to build relationships, in means that might feel uncomfortable to people, not to lie, not to cheat, not to steal, not to harm others or yourself. But I am giving you permission to push past the fear of failure, of uncertainty, of most important judgment of others. I'm giving you permission to ask your customer for what they, for what you want, or your client for what you need, or that hot person on the subway if you can give them your business card. Because, when you push past that fear, you're able to achieve so much greatness in this world. And the good thing is, like, if fear is the root, if it's not like money or talent or skill or like any of that like those things are out of your control sometimes, but fear is always in your control.
Yeah.
And everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear. So it is a permission slip to let yourself be selfish, to let yourself be bossy, to let yourself be a little bit reckless, which is erring on the side of action and taking intelligent risk. And if you're on the fence, think fast and fearless and do it. So I do think that it is all about giving permission to yourself, because no one's going to give it to you.
Right. And what I also appreciated as I was going through the book was you mentioned that fear is with us no matter where we are. The two things that we have undeniable relationships with for as long as we're on this planet are time and fear. No matter what, right? And when you get into the trait of being brutal, I have so many notes in the margins because of the kind of stuff like boundaries, right?
Yeah.
I love the fact that you, by the way, put brutal after manipulative because of the nature of boundaries in and of themselves, because boundaries, and you point this out, it's not just about enforcing them for others, but it's about enforcing them and respecting them yourself. Right.
Yeah.
And one thing you brought up was a mentor talking about everything they have on their plate brought up ruthless prioritization.
Yeah. Mike.
And
I don't name him in the book, but it was Mike.
So to me, what was interesting about that is the only time I think ruthless really works in that instance is when you're talking about, like, in terms of productivity, is when you are talking about prioritization.
Yes, or your calendar.
Yeah, because ruthlessness can lead to burnout, right? Because you can get but this is more like intense intentionality, and you're building these frames around it. So I want to talk about, like, what did it take for you? And I know you tell a story in the book, but to make sure that you stay brutal with your calendar and with your time, especially in light of this New York Times bestselling, like this book, because now the demand is going to be greater. How do you balance that?
I don't know yet, is my honest answer. Like,
Fair.
well, with respect to the New York Times,
sure.
First of all, you kind of think you're going to hit the New York Times and then, like, your world's going to explode and offers are going to be coming in left, right, and center. And, like, you just, like, there's a stack of checks this high from companies who want to pay you in advance for a keynote fee. Well, it turns out my mailbox, it's like kind of empty still. So I'm kidding. It'll take time. I think it'll take time.
Sure.
And I will, invoking the shameless chapter, I will leverage the hell out of the fact that this is a New York Times bestseller, because it's quite hard to get.
Yes.
But I do think this will open up more opportunities. And I plan to be opportunistic on those opportunities. But I think, again, it goes back to say yes to the big, say no to the small. Like, what's big? Right before I hopped in this call, I spent an hour with legendary coach and author Marshall Goldsmith, New York Times bestselling author, right?
He's been on the show a couple of times as well. We're going to have, like, show notes like crazy. Callbacks to past episodes. Yeah.
Legendary human. In fact, he said something kind of similar to what you were saying earlier, where he's like, it's okay to both want to be rich and famous and successful and influential, and also serve people and give to the world and give of yourself and be generous and coach. He coaches everybody for free. He's got like these programs. He's an incredible human.
Yeah, the AI stuff. Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, unbelievable. So, okay, so going back to brutal, and like, so who knows what opportunities this New York Times bestseller list designation is going to give or not give. Let's assume it's going to give some. So yes, I'm going to spend 60 minutes on a call with Marshall Goldsmith, which might not have happened had I not hit the Times. Although actually, I think that meeting was set up before I hit the Times. But that is like that is saying yes to the big. 60 minutes with him. That's about as big as it gets in my eyes. He's a legend.
Yeah.
But I also probably got 12 emails in the last week of people who, Googler, aspiring authors, or people who, saw me talk and they thought I seemed really nice and kind and that maybe I'd give them 30 minutes. And like, I've got to be brutal. I can't give them 30 minutes because it's not scalable. And maybe there's the occasional one of those 12 that have asked me for time who looks really promising and who I like genuinely feel like I would connect with, or they wrote a really killer email to me, because that matters. Like if you want to influence someone to give you 30 minutes, write in bullets, not 7 meandering paragraphs. Tell them, I've got an ego. Tell me what you love about my work, right? Marshall and I just talked about this. He's like, I like it when people fangirl, right?
Yeah.
He's like, I've got an ego. Tell me a specific part of my book that you liked. And so maybe I say yes to people who are clearly more engaged in my work than the average person who's just kind of reaching out. But the reality is I'm not going to say yes to all 12 of those 12 people and that's where I have to ruthlessly prioritize. It is hard, Mike, because I want to say yes to all of them because A, I'm flattered. B, I like giving. I wouldn't have written this book if I didn't. C, I love connecting individually one-on-one with people. And I can't always do that at scale with my newsletter or on LinkedIn or wherever I'm sharing content. But at the end of the day, I have to ruthlessly prioritize. I vote with my calendar and I need to make time for my kids. And I spent the last 3 years not making as much time for my kids as they would have liked. And now that the book is out, I really have to rebalance the portfolio of time.
Right. What I love also about, well, first off, you got a glow about you that is radiant, and I'm sure that everyone that's watching. No, I mean, and when we get to the final trait that you talk about, which is bossiness, right? Mm-hmm. I love how it ties everything together, but all of these traits, which we alluded to earlier when we talked about nosiness and manipulative, like they all can work either individually or in tandem. Like I just love how they kind of intertwine. When someone thinks about bossiness, though, again, it comes back to no, you don't want to hear that term, right? You don't want, that person's bossy. And then, of course, the term got kind of co-opted into boss meaning like badass, right? Like that kind of thing. It was and so you, in that chapter, you kind of dance that line, I think, in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting what you're saying about this already being co-opted, because I think for the haters of the book, and someone sent me a subject line 2 weeks before the book came out, subject line, I hope your book flops. And I just shared a picture of me and my daughter, and she was helping me sign books, which I'm not sure that the bookstore was psyched that my daughter was signing books along with me, but whatever, shameless, we went for it. And she said, your daughter seems very sweet. She probably looks up to you a lot. But I hope your book flops. Weird, I'll give you weird. But you want to teach her the values of being selfish and shameless and manipulative? How dare you, blah, 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 right? And like, it hurt because words hurt, and it was hard to read that. But it's funny that you bring up like bossy's already been co-opted. I mean, I think this person was having a hard time seeing the reframing of these. And like, wouldn't it be fascinating if 10 years from now, just like being a boss has already been co-opted, or like even weird, like keep Austin weird is already a good thing.
Keep Portland weird there. I mean, more cities are becoming weird.
Yeah. So it's like weird is already good. Bossy is already good. Right. Or like, being a boss. So wouldn't that be funny if 10 years from now, it was like, oh man, she's so manipulative. Like she's a rock star. So it's like, we're not quite there yet with some of these words, but it does feel like a really bold, potentially reckless move, right? That like it's possible. Sick used to mean unhealthy. Now sick is like so cool, right? Wicked used to mean bad, and now it's like, oh, for a long time, wicked was like, that's wicked. So I haven't answered your question about bossy, but I think
but actually, this is a good way because the absolutism that comes out when people think about terms or words, where it's like it's this or it's that, like nuance is this book is riddled with nuance, and you gotta like, which I really appreciated, but you can't, it's not like this book is, I mean, although I do love the steps at the beginning where you say, hey, if you're interested in this, go here. If you're interested in this, go here. Now I have the galley, so it was sending me to 100 every single time, but that's the way it goes, right?
Sorry for being totally unhelpful there.
It's not my first rodeo, but the point is that, in a world that seems to be trying to move away from nuance, this book and what you're doing in here is kind of saying, look, you can't just read these as BuzzFeed headlines. You got to dig in a bit and see what I'm actually talking about.
Yeah, that's right. And I think this person hadn't read the book. She didn't understand the nuance, and I understand that. I get it. Like, I knew it was going to ruffle some feathers. But bringing it back to Bossy, it's the courage to listen and lead. And it is really about that. Like, all the traits come together to create a leader, because cultivate partners and allies and collaborators. When you help them aggressively, even when you push them mercilessly, when you win their gratitude, you can achieve amazing things together. And that's what Bossy is. Being the boss at Google for a long time, I was able to make a lot of mistakes. Like, the first time I was managing managers for the first time, I felt like I had to go in guns blazing. Like, I had all the answers. We had this big offsite coming up where we were developing the strategy to shut down a business unit in one part of the world and build it back up in another. I felt completely in over my head, so much imposter syndrome. And so I just overcorrected. I was too obsessed, got caught in a trait trap there. Opened a 30-slide deck, squeezed as much data and information and guidance and strategy and pillars and leaders of each pillar of like what my leaders on my team should be doing. And then I walked into this meeting the next day, this offsite, and I plugged in my laptop. I started confidently presenting my 30-slide plan, and they raked me over the coals. And they were like, why would you come in here acting like you have all the answers? We bring a combined 35 years of experience to this team, because they'd all been there much longer than I had. I was 3 months into the role. They had been like lifers in this org at Google. And they all knew each other really well. They knew their strengths and weaknesses. I was still learning them. But my insecurities as a leader made it so that I felt like I had to give them all the answers to prove my value. That's why I say Bossy is the courage to lead through listening. I should have literally gone in with a bunch of Sharpies and a couple of, easels and whatever, dry erase markers and a whiteboard. And we should have crafted that narrative together, or like the strategy together. And I say the two things a Bossy leader are like two of the most powerful things they say are the humble two. I don't know, and I was wrong. So at least that day I said I was wrong. I was like, guys, I am so sorry. Let's scrap this plan and start from scratch. But I should have said, going into that offsite with those senior leaders who were reporting to me, I should have said, I don't know. I do not know the answer. I got this job because of my potential, but you all know much more than I do. Like, what do you think we should be doing? What do you think the 3 pillars should be? What are your strengths? Where would you like to be aligned? As opposed to me saying, like, these are the 3 pillars. These are the leaders for each pillar. Like, I really pissed them off.
Well, and, one of the things that came up, we got another quick question here before we wrap up. Sure. Again, the idea of, you could take each of the traits and turn them into positives, or perceived positives, with a different word. Reckless equals brave. Although, I mean, again, the book is called Wild Courage. Nosy equals curious. Did you consider doing that? Or was it were you, hell-bent on, I want to kind of reframe these words to show that there is, again, nuance and power within them, looking at them from a different vantage point?
No, I didn't start with the word. I started with the tools and the stories and retrofitted that into the words based on this 14-page homework assignment.
Right.
And that was why it was such a good assignment. It was like, what would have an ick factor? And it's not like I had written out, I developed this, with my editors, like, okay, well, this we could consider nosy, right? Because I talked a lot about how much I ask questions in life and how it drives my husband crazy when we go to a hotel and we check in. Yep. And I'm like, what's the best running route? And what are the best Asian restaurants? And, can I walk to the event versus, drive? And so
really quick. It reminds me of the story when my wife and I were going to the States, and we were going through the airport in Vancouver, and she forgot to tell me that she had fruit with her. And so they pulled us into the secondary, and they pulled out the fruit, and it was an orange, and it had product of Florida or whatever.
Sure.
And my wife's the guy's takes it from her. And I was like, where's that going? Like, why do you guys take that? I'm like, shut up. We don't need to. We just want to go to Disney Land. Like, stop the question.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing. That would so be me. Okay, so it's nuanced. We said it's nuanced. Like, there are times where it's really smart to ask questions. Like, if you're leading the offsite to senior managers and you want to say, what pillar would you like to lead, and how can we communicate this to the team, and what are your strengths? Great times to be nosy. Maybe not such a good time to be nosy when you're dealing with customs officers.
Yeah,
so
not the best. Not the best.
Nuance.
Jenny, I want to be respectful of your time. Thanks to everybody who's joined us for the live stream. Jenny, before you go, someone picks up this book. What is if they could make your day, what would be the thing that you would want them to take away from this book?
It's pushing past the fear of failure, uncertainty, and most importantly, judgment of others. Because there's this thing called the spotlight effect. It's a social psychological principle that basically says that we all walk around with a spotlight on our heads, really worrying about ourselves, worrying about, what people think of us and our typo in an email. But think about it. Like, if you lose sleep at night about something you did at work or something you didn't do, you're probably losing sleep feeling like you let someone down, or you messed up, or you didn't deliver to your best ability. I would be shocked if anybody here loses sleep at night worrying about somebody else who didn't deliver to a client, or somebody else's typo in an email, or somebody else's slide that maybe wasn't perfect in their presentation. And just as we never lose sleep worrying about their mistake, they're not losing sleep worrying about our mistake. Like, nobody is thinking about you as much as you are. That's the spotlight effect. And so the reason I say of these three fears, the most important one to push past is the judgment of others, is because people are not judging you nearly as much as you are judging yourself. And so once you can recognize that and push past the fear of what others might think, it will allow you to be a little bit more selfish, shameless, reckless in the right way. Because you achieve great things.
Yeah. You've seen that Hugh McCloud cartoon where it's like, what you think people are looking at, and it's everyone looking at you, but what they're actually doing is they're looking at their cell phones.
Perfect. Exactly.
The book is called Wild Courage. Go after what you want and get it. Jenny, thank you so much for taking the time to have a productive conversation with me today.
Well, yeah, this is an absolute delight. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, we're going to wrap up the live stream. Jenny, can you stick around for like one more minute after I wrap up? Thanks to everybody for being here. It sounds like people are interested in bringing this to our Time Crafting Trust book club for an upcoming one. So
let's do it.
Yeah, we just had Ann Lors, who again, we had her on the show, and we're actually, that's the book for this month. And then next month,
dear friend of mine.
Yeah, she's fantastic. I got a chance to hang out with her at the Second Brain Summit late last year, I guess.
Oh, Tiago's another dear friend of mine. We know all the same people. Ryder, Carol,
Cal. I mean, I was going through like the acknowledgements, going, yep.
Usual suspects.
Yes, pretty much. All right, everybody, we're gonna end the live stream here. Thanks again, Jenny, and stick around in the green room, and we'll chat a little bit more. But take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.